So the 2025 Buffalo Bills draft class has marinated, ladies and gentlemen, right? I think all of us have our finalized opinions on whether or not that this was a good draft from Brandon Beane in the front office. But like it or not, we're stuck with these guys. These guys are now future Buffalo Bills. So what I wanted to do on today's episode is that I wanted to discuss who I genuinely believe is going to be day one contributors. And more importantly, how many of these guys are actually going to make the roster. With literally every single NFL team, you can see draft classes from, 6 guys all the way to 12 or 13. Oftentimes, a lot of them, especially toward the back half of the draft class, are more than likely going to be practice squad personnel. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go player by player, and I wanted to see whether or not that I could actually find a roster spot for them in 2025. And I'm very excited to unpack prospect by prospect. As you are coming in, folks, please do me a favor, smash that like button. It is the easiest way to show love over here on the channel. My name is Dan Mitchell. I put out NFL content and Buffalo Bills content each and every single day, Monday through Friday. So say, for example, you vibe with the show. Easiest way to show some love is just by hitting that thumbs up sign. And when subscribing, make sure you turn on those bell notifications so you never miss an opportunity to tune into the show live. And that goes for everybody listening on Spotify and or Apple Podcasts. As many of you can tell, I am not in my normal setup. I am currently in a hotel. I am traveling until Friday. I saw a couple of comments on yesterday's edition. I feel like everybody was asking me, Dan, where's all the Bills stuff, man? What's going on with your room? I am in a hotel. I promise you the beautiful background that you have grown accustomed to will return Friday when I get back into town. But the 2025 draft class, whether or not it's controversial, I feel like each and every single year, I feel like most Bills fans are split on whether or not they believe that this was the best draft class ever or an absolute dumpster fire from the front office. Neither of those groups are correct, as many of us can tell by the countless numbers of analysis that we have seen from a variety of different beat reporters and or content creators. But again, these are our guys. And now I want to go through player by player and let you know whether or not that I think, number one, they're going to make the roster. And then, of course, whether or not that I can see them being a day one contributor. Starting off with Max Harrison, right? Like it or not, this guy was the definition of one of the weaknesses that Brandon Beane wanted to address this offseason. Because it's often said that a team recognizes their biggest weakness in their last game of the season from the previous year. And I think we can all agree that biggest issue, at least on paper, and so I can make an argument that the largest issue is not being able to get pressure on the quarterback. But I'd say 1A and 1B, 1B being that we lacked significant speed in the defense, right? If we ultimately ended up going against the Xavier Worthies of the world, the Hollywood Browns of the world, the Tyreek Hills of the world, say, for example, that he decides to stay in Miami for 2025, we particularly only ended up going with corners that were, I say, semi-fast, 4.4, 4.5, 40 is basically how it all kind of plays out. And that's fine because Buffalo typically runs a lot of zone. However, last year, we decided, you know what? I think that we're going to start implementing a bit more man coverage. Toward the back half of the season and even in the playoffs, the Buffalo Bills were running a shit ton of man, folks. I'm talking 40% of the snaps was man coverage. And while I liked the idea, the problem is that we didn't necessarily have the personnel that could efficiently execute that. Because these guys, like I said, 4.4, 4.5, 40s, and that's been the identity for the Buffalo Bills a lot since, this is a zone league. There are no predominantly man coverage defenses in the NFL. And while the Buffalo Bills historically have been toward the back half of the league as far as man percentage, we really cranked it up toward the back half of the season. Now we end up plugging and playing a guy who, number one, comes from a zone system, but at the same time, he has the speed that you typically see from a man corner. Do I see the Buffalo Bills transitioning to a man like defense? No, I do not see that. But I do see us picking up that trend where we run a bit more man and moving forward with that same sentiment that we had in the playoffs and toward the back half of said season. Max Harrison's that guy. He is that guy. And I know that you can look at Sean McDermott historically and say, hey, he doesn't necessarily like letting rookies hit the ground running. I think this might be something outside of McDermott's character this year. I do think, I genuinely believe, and obviously I'm speaking too soon. We have to see how training camp sort of pans out. But I do see by the time week 1 is here, barring any sort of lackluster performances in training camp and in the preseason, Max Harrison is certainly going to be CB2. He's going to be opposite of Christian Benford. And then we have insurance policies with Trey White. Same thing with Dane Jackson on the outside. I think that we can all agree there. His skill set is just that important. Again, as many of you know, I'm not so much concerned about his tackling issues, if you will. The season prior to injury, his missed tackle rate was at about, I think it was like 8.3%, which is not terrible. Last year was closer to about 24, but remember, he missed half of the season with a shoulder injury, and when he did come back, it was clear on tape that the guy, his shoulder injury was rearing its ugly head during several of his tackling attempts. As Bruce Exclusive always says, as long as the guy is willing to tackle, that's fine. You can coach that out of him. And maybe his shoulder injury really was holding him back. However, I cannot look past his ability and speed to be able to run side by side with the fastest wide receivers in the league. And then additionally, his ball skills that he brings to the table. So Maxwell Harrison, it's pretty clear he's making this roster. And I think it's even clearer that from week 1 going into it, I think he has a really good shot of winning Sean McDermott over, not necessarily because he loves the player and he's going to set aside his, I want to baby rookies into like this overall system, but rather he's going to need to, especially if Buffalo wants to continue that identity that they have largely been attempting to put into place. So fair enough. Max Harrison, he fixes that issue for the Buffalo Bills, and I see him being a day 1 starter. I am not going to lie to you. Next up, we have TJ Sanders, and many of you know my beef with TJ Sanders. Not the player, stud, right? He's a 3-tech defensive tackle. He is the kind of guy that is a pass rushing D. Yes, he can play 1-tech, of course, but that's like basically picking an all-star baseball player to be your quarterback rate on a football team, right? Like you were asking him to do something that he was not born to do. TJ Sanders is born to rush the quarterback. And I think this really raises a lot of questions of what the future plans are for Ed Oliver, because next year we technically have an out on Ed Oliver's contract, right? The cap implications with a post-June 1st cut are actually very, very attractive. Like we can move on from Ed Oliver in 2026 with very limited downside when it comes into the cap. So maybe that was what Brandon Beane was thinking in the first place. However, do I see TJ Sanders being automatically implemented into this defense? You're damn right. I do. I do think that he more than likely will be placed next to Ed or next to Dwayne Carter exclusively for passing downs, right? Because I think that when it comes into it, I think Buffalo is going to want to really to attempt to improve that pass rush, specifically in the interior, situationally at least. However, I think on regular downs, first and second, etc., I still think we're going to be seeing a lot of Daquan Jones, a lot of him. Maybe Deion Walker here and there, but we will get to him. But I do think TJ Sanders, while I don't think that he's going to be the first 3-tech that is rolled out there, I think that at least at the beginning of the season, he is going to be a situational player. For all we know, he ends up beating out Ed Oliver. And toward the back half of the season, he is our true 3-tech moving forward. But super interesting. Super interesting. I have TJ Sanders probably starting the season off 20 to 30% of the snaps, right? Like I said, a situational defensive tackle for like passing downs, for example. But I think 20 to 30% of the snaps, at least beginning of the season, maybe he ends up increasing those numbers as the season goes along, is certainly reasonable to believe. Next up, we have Landon Jackson, edge rusher out of Arkansas. Several of us are very happy about this selection, especially the value that we got in the 3rd round, myself included. I look at Landon Jackson and I look at that pick of going for an edge rusher that early in the NFL draft. And it tells me a couple of things. Number one is AJ Epinesa going to be a surprise cut in training camp? Is Solomon going to be a surprise cut in training camp? Because when you look at our overall room, we genuinely have a crowded edge rushing room here. And while I see Landon Jackson being a very high ceiling-esque player, I do think that he is going to have at least a year or two of development. Um, he has significantly improved from the time that he started off at LSU. He transferred over to Arkansas. We could all laugh at that one bag drill that went viral that's been going around on X since we did draft him. But I do still think that he needs a bit more development. His tape is very promising, right? I loved his matchups against the Will Campbells of the world. He also ended up dominating who is soon to be the first tackle prospect to go in the draft next year. So I think the ceiling is very high. But I think when it comes into dominating snaps as far as snap count, I think that we can all agree it's more than likely going to be a Gregory Rousseau and a Joey Bosa show. Obviously, if Joey Bosa can indeed stay healthy and give us a full season, where Landon Jackson would probably have 20 to 30% of the snaps as well. Solid rotation on the defensive line, something that Buffalo needed. He's quality depth in 2025, and I hope that we can develop him into an absolute stud by the time 2026 and 2027 comes around. So Landon, he's obviously making the team, but as far as utilization, don't be surprised if we see very limited production and playing time from him at the beginning of the season, barring any sort of injury from our starters. But I still feel very comfortable on the depth there. I really do. Now, moving forward with Deion Walker. All right. I love the prospect going into the pre-draft process, but as many of you know, I would have much preferred that he was the second defensive tackle taken off of the board, which he was, but only if we ended up double dipping at the one tech defensive tackle, right? Then like we would have had an entire different conversation. Hence why I'm hesitant about Deion Walker now is because I think that the young man is a gamble, right? Like we are trying to justify that Deion Walker is like, oh, he had a fractured back in 2024. Like he's going to be so much better. But you look at a lot of his mechanics, right? He is very top heavy. He's very strong up top. But below, you see him get dominated, especially with low blocking offensive linemen. I think that could be coached out of him. I think that some time in the weight room and I think some time with our defensive line coach is only going to improve this young man. But I think largely this is where we're getting into the project portion of the draft. This is coming into the boom and or bust. He has a lot to learn. Perhaps I could see him out there on situational downs, right? On running downs, say, for example, if like we're getting gashed up the middle from some of the better running backs in the league. But I really think that he has a long time to develop, and who knows? I don't think that he's the answer, like moving forward at one tech. Perhaps we end up like revisiting that specific position in the 2026 NFL draft when Daquan Jones ultimately ends up leaving Buffalo after his final year of said contract. At first, I thought Daquan Jones could have potentially been a roster casualty this offseason because very limited cap implications if we walked away from him this year. But I just don't see anybody behind him that I would trust to take over, like right at this point. I think that I wouldn't feel comfortable with Deion Walker going out there and being our predominant starter right in 2025. I am a huge advocate right now of keeping Daquan Jones on that final year and not even entertaining to ship him off anywhere for um, some future capital, because that would really be a question indeed. Next up, we're starting to get into conversations of, is this player going to make the team? Is he going to be a special teams contributor? What does this mean for players that are on the depth chart right next to him? And that goes with Jordan Hancock, a cornerback out of Ohio State. I'll tell you what, I think that we can say goodbye to Cam Lewis on this team, right? He's been a utility player for this team for quite some time, right? He is our utility guy. He could play slot. I've seen a couple of instances where he played on the outside. He's also played safety every now and again in situational purposes. Jordan Hancock is a younger version of a said Cam Lewis. And I think that's likely what he is going to be. Because when you look at the depth behind Taron Johnson, rather, when you look at the depth, like right in the safety department, I think that you need an emergency player like this. And Hancock also has some special teams chops. I think Hancock is a shoo-in to make this roster. I really, really do. Um, I don't know what that means for Cam Lewis. It depends on how Sean McDermott is going to look at it. Is he going to prefer the veteran presence or is he going to go with the youth? It's all going to be determined based off of training camp. I have like a 50-50 shot because there's been so many times where I said, oh, yeah, like Sean McDermott's definitely going to walk away from DeMar Hamlin this year because we got so-and-so in free agency or we got this guy like right in the draft. And Sean McDermott historically has always ultimately ended up siding with familiarity and vets, especially once compared to players that were selected later on in the round. But I do have a gut feeling here. I have a gut feeling that this guy is going to replace Cam Lewis because that's exactly the type of player that he is. He's a guy that can fill in at the safety on an absolute emergency, and he's also a guy that could be behind Taron Johnson. Let's just see how he develops in camp. Next up, you have Jackson Hawes, tight end, and it's going to be a replacement for Quentin Morris. I'm not sure if I really like Zach Davidson, and you look at what Joe Brady likes to run, right? Like, dude loves 12-man personnel. He does, like having two tight ends out there. And while Dawson Knox fits that role very well, it's always good to have that conversation because Dawson Knox's contract next year as well is probably going to be in that area where we could walk away if, for example, we wanted to, and Hawes would be able to do it. He's not much of a receiving threat, right? But then again, Dawson Knox really isn't either. Like, how many receptions did Dawson Knox have last year? Like 21, like 22. We got this gentleman for his blocking capabilities. And when you look at how Joe Brady has taken this offense since he's taken over, he loves to run the damn ball. And what is important when you have a run-focused-esque type offense, need to have skill position players with the ability to block, right? Like, be critical of Keon Coleman as much as you would like, but Keon Coleman is so key when it comes into run blocking. So is Dawson Knox. And Hawes ends up bringing that to the table on top of special teams contributions, which where Buffalo struggled in special teams last year, we addressed it via the coaching staff situation. I have a brand new special teams coach. I think Jackson Hawes is all but a lock to make this team as tight end 3. Now, this is kind of where we get to some things. And these last 3 players, barring some sort of miracle and barring some sort of electric training camp performance, I just don't really see a fit for them. Whether or not that has to do with their skill or whether or not that has to do with a variety of veterans that I believe that Sean McDermott loves and is not planning on choosing a younger guy over. That's Dorian Strong, a cornerback out of Virginia Tech. Now, it's funny because he was often mocked, right? Like in the second and or the third round, but for some odd reason, he ended up falling as far as we did. Typically, I would say, Strong was a guy that if you were to reflect 2 or 3 years ago where Buffalo loved going for like that outside corner that isn't necessarily a burner, probably would have made the team. But now I look at the CB2 position, right? So I see a Christian Benford who's going to be by himself right over there. Say, for example, pray to God he doesn't end up getting injured. Then you see Trey White could go back there. Then you see Dane Jackson. And I look at all of the players that are on this squad. You have Trey White. You have Dane Jackson. You have Christian Benford. You have Max Harrison, who we just ended up spending a first-round pick on. You have Jamarcus Ingram as well, who's sitting there at 5. You have Taron Johnson, and then you also have Hancock. I feel like when I look at both of those other players, it's going to be an absolute battle. So between a Dorian Strong and or a Hancock. In my opinion, I think that Hancock brings a bit more versatility to the room because you could utilize him. But say, for example, that he can't beat out Cam Lewis, then maybe Dorian Strong is a different conversation. It's going to be one of those two, but I'm probably going to have to pick Hancock making this team over Dorian Strong. Strong could potentially be a practice squad guy. Could be wrong, but again, this is all just knee-jerk reactions. It's 4 days removed from the NFL draft. Everything could happen in rookie minicamp and in training camp. I promise you, I will be covering this ad nauseum until we finally have a final 53-man roster. So next up, you see Chase Luntz, an offensive tackle out of Connecticut. Don't necessarily see him making this team. I don't see him beating out Ryan Vandemark, who has been a great depth piece on this offensive line. Have Alec Anderson as well, who is our sixth man on the offensive line. It's just a very crowded room. Reflecting back, I honestly wish that we would have went with an interior offensive lineman rather than yet another tackle, because we have Spencer Brown, we have Ryan Vandemark. I just think that it would be redundant and sort of a waste of a roster spot to grab yet another tackle, right? That's just me. However, I could be wrong. And then last but not least, I have Caden Prather. I think the Buffalo Bills would be shocked themselves if Caden Prather ultimately ended up making this team, right? 7th round selection. We're still bringing in wide receivers on free agent visits, including, and so the guy that we ended up bringing in yesterday, and that was Elijah Moore. Yes, he's fast. He's fast on the outside, but I think that this guy is just going to be a camp body, and he's going to be somebody that can compete within training camp. Again, I would be happy to be wrong, but that's kind of my thought process. So with the 9 picks that make this roster, I think that Max Harrison is one. Of course, TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, and Deion Walker. I think that's clear. So 4 for sure will make this roster. I have Jordan Hancock with like a 70% chance. Hawes, I'd probably give about 100. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, yeah. So I think when it comes down into it, I think that the Buffalo Bills ultimately end up keeping 6 of the 9 draft picks that make this roster, something that we have been discussing for weeks, right? Have a lot of draft picks, really only a select few amount of roster spots. And I think those guys are more than likely going to make the squad. So, guys, this is the time of my episode where I allow my audience, my live chat viewers, to take control of the conversation. If, for example, you have a question, please begin your entry with a Q dash so I know exactly how to decipher between questions and or statements and or internal conversations between viewers. I'm just trying to make sure that I have a great listening experience for anybody that is tuning in on the replay version of this show, and then also anybody that is listening on Spotify and or Apple Podcasts. By the way, guys, this show is now on all audio forms. So say, for example, that you want to do me a solid, say that you have some extra time this morning, please go to the links that are currently in my description for Spotify and or Apple Podcasts. If you could follow me and leave a rating and review if you have been enjoying the show, please, 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 please make it happen. Make it happen, man. Guys, again, start everything off. If, for example, you have a question, begin it with Q dash. This is the time where my audience takes control of the conversation. Hey, just got in here. What is going on? TJ, man, we were just going through all of the draft selections the Buffalo Bills made just a couple of days ago, and we were discussing who we genuinely believe is going to make this roster. Now, it's still very early to have these conversations because training camp can really take this off of the rails. But I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that there is going to be 6 players that ultimately end up making this team. 6 players that ultimately end up making this team out of the 9. We have Ryan Hack. Isn't Prather a 6'3" and ran a 4.4 in the 40? He's got the build to be good, just has to show up and ball out. And listen, say, for example, he does, I'm going to be very happy because you know why? We would be able to answer quite a bit of the questions that we have at the wide receiver room. But until training camp, I'm not going to be able to give a stamp of approval or be able to hop on the train and say he's 100% going to make this roster until training camp. Because full transparency, like when I was looking at wide receivers in this draft, I said, okay, no later than the 5th round is Buffalo going to select a wide receiver because we need that speed that can create vertical separation. And yeah, so safe to say, I did not really put in a lot of research on a player that was projected to go in the 7th round. We have Inception 877 has come up with a question, and I appreciate that. He says, So I'm concerned about the Walker pick. Back injuries are not something that just go away. And do you think it's something the Bills can manage? And do you think he will be able to cope with extra demands in the NFL? That's a great question. So I think it's good that Daquan Jones is still on this roster for a final year, right? And I don't think that Deion Walker is really going to have many games where he is going to surpass 20 to 30% of the snap share. I really don't. I think the Buffalo Bills drafted him knowing that he was going to be a project, knowing that he had to, number one, prove himself and also further develop. Yes, he had a back injury last year. That's true. However, a lot of his tape suggests that he struggles with lower body strength, especially if you can find some offensive linemen that are great at getting damn low. He's nowhere near as effective, and he's massive too. He's 6'6", right? So going low on this prospect is not very difficult for these offensive linemen. So he's going to have to spend some time in the weight room and do whatever he possibly can. So to get that strength more centralized down to his lower sense of gravity. But I think it's going to be the Daquan Jones show for the vast majority of the season. Let's go on ahead. Let's cross our fingers and hope that he can stay healthy. And then maybe Deion Walker ends up surprising us with the limited snaps that I'm assuming he's going to get, and say that it's not huge. Then worst case scenario, we could just revisit the 2026 NFL draft and have one tech defensive tackle a far higher priority. That could be kind of where we're at here. We have DeBlazer 10. And do you think we should have drafted the other cornerbacks other than Hairston or taken other players? So I look at the board, right, man? And I see quite a bit of red flags for some of the other cornerbacks that we could have drafted in his place. Like Will Johnson ultimately ended up falling all the way to the second round. And if that tells you that 32 teams and several of them twice passed up on him, then his medicals must have been very scary. So like these doctors must have been like, okay, yeah, like he's like one slight knee sprain away from hanging up the cleats and going into a media career right within the SEC network, right? So I think Buffalo ultimately ended up making the right decision there because hell, like, dude, like we had such a heartbreaking moment when Trey White got injured, like back-to-back years, and he was just never the same. So I think Buffalo just didn't want to roll the dice on somebody that had those knee injuries really at the end of the day. Same thing with Siobhan Ravel. As many of you know, I was a big Siobhan Ravel guy. I would have been happy with Siobhan Ravel, but again, right, like he's coming off of an ACL tear as well. So I think with who was best available and who ends up fitting what the Bills were trying to do, I think Max Harrison was the pick. He was the safest pick, right? And then on top of that, he also ends up addressing one of the weaknesses the Buffalo Bills showed that they had in the AFC Championship game. A player that is very fast and can run side by side with the fastest wide receivers in the league. Yes, we run predominantly zone, but toward the back half of the season, we started seeing 30 to 40% of the time we were running man coverage. Like we basically ran man coverage the entire time over in Baltimore. I was kind of surprised how we were able to do it because we don't have the personnel. Now we're starting to add personnel that can run man if absolutely necessary. And so I think with who was available and also not to grab a guy that would have been considered a reach, I think Max Harrison made the most sense. We have RM56. Would you have preferred the Bills to get Donovan? So the Ezeruku, round 2, he was considered a round 1 talent that somehow fell. Yeah. 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 So people ask me, like, who would you have preferred over TJ Sanders? I would have preferred an Ezeruku, and then I also would have preferred an Alfred Collins. Like, those two would have been ideal. But again, guys, listen, like, these are our guys, and we need to root for them, right? Like, we need to root for the guys that are on the table, and the pick was TJ Sanders. We traded up for the guy. He's another 3 tech. He's probably going to be solid when it comes into passing down specifically. And yeah, but like, as far as what I would have preferred, I definitely would have went with it. I definitely would have went with an Ezeruku, or I definitely would have went with Alfred Collins. But hey, listen, these are our guys, and I'm riding with them until the very end. Statement. I watched some film on Hawes. He grew on me. He hasn't hit his ceiling with the right development. He could be a weapon for us. Yeah, for sure. He's not going to be a dude, right, that is going to light up the league and like rival numbers of like the Brock Bowers' rate of the world as far as receiving. But again, so the Bills really love running 12-man personnel and we love to run the football. So having a player that excels in run blocking, very good special teamer, is going to help. Is going to help quite a bit. Dan, and you need to watch Caden Prather before you write him off because he is the Mac Hollins replacement, but younger and faster. So I'm telling you, you're sleeping on KP. Yeah, for sure. So like, here's the thing about Mac Hollins, right? I feel like everyone loved Mac Hollins, but it could not have been for his statistics, right? Like, what did he go for last year? Like 300 yards, like 300 something yards, if that. Um, like that never really made a lot of sense to me. Like solid special teamer for sure, and he had a couple of key drops, but then obviously like did make some plays here and there. But like he wasn't like a massive part of our offense that I think we are going to miss or we are going to struggle sort of replacing. Say that I think that we replaced him with anybody, it's Josh Palmer, but like we're going to see a hell of a lot more production from Josh Palmer, and he's going to be a part, like right of this offense a tad more. Um, so again, so here's the deal with Prather. I'm not going to put my stamp of he's going to make this team immediately. I just got to see like how training camp comes in. And say, for example, that Buffalo was that happy with Caden Prather, then we wouldn't have been welcoming in Elijah Moore on a free agent visit, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm hoping that he could be the guy. Trust me, I am never rooting against us finding a solution. But as of now, I am not convinced. I got in late after Landon Jackson talk. What ceiling player do you think he can be if he turns out like Crosby? I would be over the moon. I'm trying to think who they actually had a comparison with him. So most of the player comps, actually, now I remember. So so the player comp they had for Landon Jackson was Montez Sweat. He's the current edge rusher for the Chicago Bears. So say for example that like you're looking for a ceiling, and again, I hate player comps because I feel like every player is an individual that brings certain traits right to the floor, but I think it's not a Max Crosby, but it's more of a Montez Sweat as far as the skill that he brings to the table. Um, I love Landon Jackson as a rotational player this year, but what I also like to look at is what has Sean McDermott liked historically as far as who is dominating the snap count. I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot of Greg Rousseau and Joey Bosa. And then I think Landon Jackson will probably start the season off with about 20 to 30% of the snap share, hopefully situationally. And then afterwards, maybe midway through the season, about 40 to 50%. He really doesn't have a lot of bend, right? But he does win in power. And he wins on the inside as well, which is pretty insane. Like when you can see an edge rusher win on the inside on an offensive line, that's impressive. He's a power rusher, right? Like he's the kind of guy that wins with power. He's a great run defender too, which is ideal. So say that I'm a gambling man. I think that we see Landon Jackson start off with like a modest snap count, and then midway through the season, I could see us ramping up those numbers. Love the pick by Landon Jackson. I really, really do. Love that. Dan, will the AFC East Roundtable do an meet and greet in Buffalo this year? Dirty Dan, that is the plan, my friend. We're just waiting on the Bills schedule to be released. And then I am going to be in charge of building out the Buffalo Bills event. Last year I tried to do it, but it's very difficult because like when we have an event for the Jets or the Miami Dolphins, they have packages where like we can like get like 50 tickets together where like we can watch the football game together. But so in Buffalo, we don't have that, right? Like it's like 10 tickets on one side of the stadium, 6 on the other, 5 over here, 8 over here. And we feel like that kind of defeats the purpose. So we're trying to think of like a really good way where we can meet everybody in Buffalo, like whether or not that's just an exclusive tailgate party or whether or not that's like a bar right before the night where we have a live show. But rest be assured, I am going to make sure that I can get an event in Buffalo. Make no mistake about that. Should we pick undrafted free agent Bond and release him if the SA sticks. I feel like we already got a guy with SA allegations, right? So right in Max Harrison. So I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen with that prospect. He's fast on the outside, but yeah, I don't know about that. And do you think we address wide receiver more this offseason? If yes, what is your dream scenario? And two, what do you think is most likely? Michael, great question, man. Great question. Yes, I do think that we are still going to address wide receiver. I think that we're going to try and find a speed guy right on the outside. I know that Brandon Bean hopped on WGR yesterday and he seemed like wildly frustrated about people asking the question, but I feel like we should be right in asking the question, right? Like you had like 7 to 8 dudes come in on pre-draft visits that were projected to go in the second and the third, and he's angry that we're asking, why didn't you get a wide receiver? I think the question was justified, right? But is my dream scenario? My dream scenario is making a trade for Jamison Williams from the Detroit Lions. That's a dream. Unlikely to come to fruition, but let a man dream, right? Most realistic, we'll probably bring in a player like Elijah Moore. That's most realistic, right? Or like maybe a reunion with Amari Cooper, although that he really doesn't fit the kind of wide receiver I think this team needs. But yeah, so the dream is J-Mo Williams from Detroit because there's rumors that he's on the block and Detroit is interested in moving him. Most realistic, we're going to be bringing in Elijah Moore. That's kind of where I'm tapering my expectations. Carter needs the step up this year. I'm very high on Carter this year, man. Like he was playing with a broken hand for the majority of the season. So I think we could be okay. We have RM56. Hawes and Anderson are going to be wreaking havoc. It was a very Joe Brady pick. I mean, listen, dude, loves 12-man personnel, loves running the damn football. Yes, it definitely is. It definitely is. Since the Grant jersey is garbage now, whose name will be on the back of your next Bills jersey? Jonas, don't remind me. Don't remind me that Kenneth Grant's a Miami Dolphin. It breaks my heart. Whose name will be on the back of my next jersey? I probably wouldn't buy a rookie jersey, right? Because you don't know who's going to actually be a dude right in the NFL. Who would my next one be? I'd probably get a Benford jersey, man. And so I'm a big Christian Benford guy. So I feel like Benford would probably be my next investment in the jersey department. I love seeing Bean fired up like that. He does everything he can to build a winning team, and I think he was valid in being frustrated with all the questioning. Just me. Yeah, dude, honestly, it's definitely been polarizing. So across the Bills community, it's definitely been polarizing. So Elijah Moore will finally have a good quarterback, and Winston was the best one who ever threw to him. I mean, look, so Elijah Moore has a lot of upside for me, right? I feel like a lot of people mistake the fact like, oh, he's a slot. Like he's actually been 50-50 as far as where he's lined up. He's lined up on the outside. He's lined up out of the slot. But he can play X, right? And you're right. He's never had a good quarterback. Maybe this is a John Brown type situation here, folks, right? Where like he's just a situational guy. And again here, right? I'm not looking for a name. I don't need a name at the wide receiver position. I need a trait. I just need 2 traits from the guy. All right. Sub 4.40 is where Elijah Moore checks that box. He ran a 4.35. Somebody who can play on the outside, he checks that box. Somebody who has starting experience and has actually had some highlights in his career, checks the box. That's it. Again, I'm not looking for a name. I'm looking for traits, especially since we have that mentality of everybody eats on this roster. That's me. How awesome was it to be featured on the Texans X post? Really cool. Really, really cool. In case y'all missed it, so the Houston Texans found an interview I had with Jalen Noel right at the Senior Bowl, and they ended up posting the video on all of their socials. Pretty insane. I'm not going to lie to you. Who would have known, right? Like the first NFL team to feature my content on their socials was not my favorite team, but it was the Houston Texans. Look at that, man. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy indeed. Harrison did play wide receiver in high school. Wouldn't that be a surprise on a 3rd and long? I mean, look, say, for example, we want to strategically like shock a team and just like use him as a Travis Hunter. Yeah, why not? Why not, man? Did the Bills sign Moore? No, not that I'm aware of. He came in for a visit yesterday. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything official, but last update that I have seen is that he just came in for a visit. We will see. Ryan Hack, forced to bet your bank account on it. Outside of Shakir, who do you take to have the most yards from our tight end wide receiver room? Outside of Shakir. Ooh. Should I give a hot take? I don't know. So it's a fine line of a hot take and just being an idiot. And I'm walking that line like I regularly do. Hot take. Who has the most receiving yards? Most receiving yards outside of Shakir. So I feel like the safe answer would be Keon Coleman because he's in year 2. And so I think that he's going to have a bit more trust in Josh Allen and also with Joe Brady as far as targets. So that would be the safe answer. Why do I want to say Curtis Samuel? Why do I want to say Curtis Samuel? All right, like you're saying, bet your entire bank account. I'm not going to bet it on Curtis Samuel, but that is a hot take. I'd probably have to go with Keon Coleman with the next most receiving yards on this squad. That or Dalton Kincaid? I don't know, man. I don't know because I have Dalton Kincaid having a bounce back year too. Dude. So many possibilities here. Did Buffalo sign Elijah Moore? No, he just visited yesterday. There's no report of him signing, but say that he is. Stay tuned. I will be live to talk about it. Palmer will be better than everyone thinks. Oh, yeah, dude. Listen, he has some crazy upside. How do I know you'd say Samuel, man? Listen, I said Keon, right? I said I was walking the line from a hot take and just being an absolute, like, homer. Curtis Samuel. Dude, we'll see. Oh, man, we'll see. So I say Palmer for his ability to separate, but I think Keon has the most touchdowns for his red zone ability. Oh, man, it's going to be crazy. If it's not Keon, then I would be concerned, Jalen. Come in. All right, guys, chat. That's going to have to do it. I'm going to go down to the hotel lobby and grab myself some breakfast and also do some side work that I need to get done. Love each and every single one of you. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel and turn on bell notifications as well, because I want you guys to have the ability to tune in live, because as you can see, I love polling the audience and hearing their thoughts on the topic at hand. And then also, if you have any time this morning, some extra time, if you wouldn't mind, all right, and helping me out and following me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and leaving a rating and review if you enjoy the show. Links are in the description. If not, I totally understand. But for anybody feeling nice and has some time this morning, love you guys. Thank you so much. And I will see you a bit later for Fourth and Forever. Deuces.